My name is Dr. Adrian Grant. I'm a historian and researcher at Ulster University, and I am here in Buncrana, County Donegal. Well, the Troubles were essentially a conflict that took place in the north of Ireland. The start and end dates are kind of debatable, but we're talking from the sort of mid to late 1960s until around about the late 1990s into the early 2000s. The roots of that conflict go right back, they can be traced right back for hundreds of years in Irish history, and then there are more immediate roots as well. I think the most immediate point that you can look at is probably with partition, with the formation of the Free State and the formation of Northern Ireland. So from around about 1912, Ireland essentially went through a massive political change. It's sort of known as the Irish Revolutionary period, variously from 1916 to 1923. But in 1912, the Ulster Covenant was signed by almost 500,000 people in Ulster, Protestant people, Unionist people. And the Covenant was essentially, it was a declaration by the people that they would fight against any form of home rule being imposed in Ireland and in Ulster. So that set in train then a series of events where you had the Ulster Volunteer Force formed in 1913, and also then the Irish Volunteers, which would later become the IRA. During the 1910s, then you had these two kind of militia groups in Ireland, and then you had the outbreak of the First World War, then of course the 1916 Rising, and this all leads to a conflict known as the Irish War of Independence then from 1919 until around about 1921. So people who were involved in the civil rights campaigns in Ireland at the time would have looked to people like Martin Luther King and to all those marches in the South in the States. So it was definitely not uniquely Irish in that sense. What was probably a little bit more unique was the fact that there was this division between Catholics and Protestants in Western Europe. Ethnic conflict is certainly not a unique thing to any country. We've seen it all throughout the 20th century and even into the present day. What's probably unique is that it was happening in a Western developed English-speaking country, which was part of the United Kingdom. So that's probably the unique element of it, was that it was happening in a place that people could feel like they could understand. People who weren't Irish could almost understand it, that it was happening in somewhere that they could identify with. You can say that there was something uniquely Irish in the way that people react to things. The black humour that people often talk about in terms of the Troubles is probably something a little bit more Irish than you might see elsewhere. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe these things do happen elsewhere, but I'm sure that they probably happen in a different way. I mean, there is a unique Irish sense of humour and a uniquely dark sense of humour in the north of Ireland. I mean, there are just so many stories. I mean, in the middle of all the terrible things that happened during the Troubles, people tended to get by with this kind of dark sense, this kind of black humour. That wasn't in any way kind of disrespectful. Perhaps sometimes it was, but often it was more about a coping mechanism in some ways. I mean, someone was telling me earlier today about how when they first moved to Derry, this is someone from the south of Ireland, moved to Derry in the late 80s, and they moved to the Bogside. Their car was, an attempt to hijack their car was made, and they asked someone else from the city, what you do in that situation, and the reply was that you tell them, you say, I know you're a ma, and you shouldn't be doing this. So it was kind of like, it was always that jokey element of things, and even though these terrible things were happening, people could get by. Okay, well, the daily life, as I said, went on. People tended to go to work, people tended to raise their families, and it's amazing, I think, how quickly people can get used to an abnormal situation. So, I mean, in a city like Derry or a city like Belfast, you would have had a highly militarised city centre where people would be searched, entering and exiting the sort of central business district of the city. You would see soldiers on the streets. You would see, automatic rifles being pointed at you as you moved around from soldiers. You may also have seen paramilitary action taking place. You may have seen rioting taking place. All these things would have happened, but at the same time, people just got on with it. There are just so many stories of people who tell their life story in a matter-of-fact way, and then there may be an aside where a bombing happened, or a shooting took place, or things that would seem scary and very, very frightening to someone who wasn't in that situation. So I think that's one of the more unexplored aspects of the Troubles, is how ordinary life went on, and how people just got on with it. And it's a really interesting topic to look at how once someone is in a situation that is that extraordinary, how they deal with it, how they cope with it, and how they normalize it internally. So you'll have, for example, people who may have been forced out of their home, who may have gone through severe trauma, who still have a great sense of humour, who still got on with their lives. But then, of course, there are the stories of people who were just so badly affected that it destroyed their lives.